Welcome back to the channel, guys. In this exciting video, we're going to be talking about a massive subject which hopefully affect everyone, and I hope by the end of this video that I've planted some very important seeds about what you can do about keeping your family safe online. And honestly, it's such a massive subject. Where do you begin? But I wanted to give you some confidence that in this video that there are some things that you can do. And honestly, unsurprisingly, it's once again related to Docker and Raspberry Pi 5. Probably one of the most magical combinations you could actually set up on your home network. And in this video, by the end of it, you should have hopefully something running on your network that gives you access to it via a login screen like this. Once you can see a login screen like this, that means you're all set and ready to go. But if you're wondering what is a Pi-hole, why should I care about security and privacy and stuff like that, let me start off by saying that a Pi-hole basically specializes in preventing big tech companies and advertising companies from profiling and understanding your online browsing habits, and more importantly, giving you something that is priceless in this digital age: privacy. It's something that you take for granted. In reality, you don't get it because almost everything anywhere is basically profiling you and trying to scan you and trying to figure out what your behavior is and trying to sell anonymized data about who you are to advertising and tech companies so that they can sell more products to you and basically invade more ways of your life. And if you can imagine, if you've got a young family that you're raising at home, trying to understand what to expose them to and what to prevent them from even seeing is an even bigger, more daunting challenge than it seems. And I'm hoping that by the end of this video, I've given you a few things that you could consider doing at home. And believe it or not, I genuinely think anyone can do this if you follow the videos that I have set up, because I intend on sharing everything that I've learned for free. But going back to the question of what is the Pi-hole, it's essentially something called a DNS sinkhole, which is basically somewhere where DNS queries go to die. In the next part of the video, I'll expand on what DNS queries are. The lovely people at Raspberry Pi have done an amazing write-up, which we will share, and that covers that. But in other words, it basically gives your network the ability to control what domains are loaded by all devices on your home network, your children's devices. If they send any messages on Instagram or wherever, you stand a chance of preventing those URLs or dodgy links that are sent to them from loading in the first place. Phishing attacks, these things will not stand a chance of loading depending on how you configure your Pi-hole. And trust me, it is a massive black art. There is so much to it once you get started. But that is essentially it. That's where we're going to stop, and we're going to now roll the ducks. Okay, so let's start off with some basic housekeeping. So this video will not introduce any new topics and subjects that hopefully you will not have seen before. And if they are new to you, then I have you covered. So on my channel, if you are wondering about how do I connect seamlessly into my Raspberry Pi, I have a video set up on my channel which covers this very subject, and it covers the various different ways of how I connect. And I use SSH and XRDP quite a lot. If you're wondering how do I actually get my files seamlessly in and out of my Raspberry Pi, I actually set up a NAS server, which was probably the most useful and the most highly recommended project I could recommend you doing first on your home network as you start on your home automation journey. You need somewhere to store your files seamlessly between your Macs and your Windows and whatever other devices that you have on your home network. And then number three, if depending on when you started your journey in the world of Raspberry Pi, you may need to do an upgrade from on the Debian operating system, which Raspberry Pi is obviously based on. It has recently been upgraded from Bookworm to Trixie, so I have a video that covers that. And then if you're wondering about, well, why do I use Docker and how do I get Docker onto my Raspberry Pi, I do have a video that covers that as well. So I do have you covered with regards to everything that I use, everything that I talk about, and everything that I depend on for my latest project, which is getting the Pi-hole server set up running inside Docker. So yeah, this is the housekeeping. This is what you need to have. Hopefully you will have this knowledge. Hopefully you can still stick around and I can prove to you how I use all these combinations of these different tools. So basically deliver my next big project, which is family security and safety, which I might add, this is the very subject I started reading about 18 months ago, which started me on this very journey. So anyway, let's roll the ducks again and let's kick off with why you should care and some of the problems we're seeing out So now it's time to basically explain a little bit what DNS is, and the lovely people at raspberrypi.com have got a really cool write-up which explains what DNS is, and they've also got a little TLDR towards the bottom of this first section which basically explains what the Pi-hole is and how it works. Pi-hole blocks requests made to add domains from your network before the request ever leaves your network. Your client devices can't connect a domain that hosts ads, but can connect a domain that hosts useful content. And then on the official Pi-hole discourse, it's kind of like a forums. There's another good explanation here. One thing that should be mentioned is that with Pi-hole, we all understand that your browser will get less ads, so things will load quicker. So it doesn't find where to download ads from, but the same is true for all other applications on your computer plus all devices on your local area network that uses the Pi-hole as the commanded DNS server. That would include cell phones, tablets, and etc. Any IoT devices you've got set up in your home network. So potentially a lot of devices running a lot of different programs could be relieved from downloading and showing ads. So in general, every device benefits on your home network because Pi-hole is set up at a network level and all traffic has to go through your Pi-hole, and your Pi-hole decides what to load and what to allow through and what to block. But when we jump back into why you should care, it's worthwhile mentioning that one of the biggest tech companies on the planet, they had a very famous unofficial motto, which was "Don't be evil," which they later changed to "Do the right thing," which is very interesting because back in 2019, Google had a very famous position where they said they would not do fingerprinting to basically track and understand users as part of their data collection efforts, where they tried to find out what people do. And it was an amazing thing. This is something that they did. So-called fingerprinting, which allows online advertisers to collect more data about users, including their IP addresses and information about the devices they use. Google says this data is widely used by the company, so they're just trying to palm you off. And here's the thing, previously they said they would never do it because they said there that fingerprinting subverts user choice and is wrong. So they went back on their position, which is very interesting when you consider their unofficial motto. It's clearly not the right thing anymore. And clearly you could argue it's maybe being a little bit evil, but I'll leave that for you to decide. So they have been called out on this massive change in corporate policy because Google, much like Facebook, are in the ads business. If they don't know what people are doing, they can't serve ads and they make less money. That's basically the crux of what Google are. But fingerprinting, this is a good article that explains what is fingerprinting. So fingerprinting collects information about a person's device and browser, where it basically tries to create a profile and it tries to use technology built in the browser to try and understand unique set of characteristics of basically where you are. And it's also used to combat bot attacks. So DDoS attacks, where basically large websites can be brought offline by basically swarming the web server with so many requests that the website stops loading for ordinary people. Those kinds of attacks generally tend to have the same fingerprint, the same characteristics, and that is one means of how they combat and deal with DDoS attacks or denial of service attacks. So fingerprinting is a very valid thing. It's a very good thing, but like with all things, it's a double-edged sword. You get one good thing, then you get one bad thing with it of how it can be used to basically track people's behavior. And that's one of the things that really should turn you off about Google. They started off in a very positive position where they said they would not do it. And then they clearly changed their position because it says there that, however, the company previously came out strongly against this kind of data collection in 2019, that fingerprinting subverts user choice. But now they've gone back on it. In 2025, they've gone back on that position. So that's kind of why I started off with the framing of the unofficial motto, and then this is the official position that they've now put forward. So that's Google. And let's jump on to other examples of why you should care. People are Googling and looking for ways on Reddit on how Pi-holes can be used to basically protect their grandparents, because grandpeople or old people, seniors, are consistently targets of choice for scammers, and they are constantly vulnerable to online scams, phishing attacks, and things of that nature, which is really sad and unfortunate. And if you follow the amazing channel Pierogi Scammer Payback, you'll notice that one of the ways he ensnares and traps a lot of scammers, he puts on a fake old lady voice. So it is a real thing. So people do Google and look for ways of how Pi-hole could be used to help improve online security for their grandparents, which is really heartwarming to see. Here is another website where, once again, the same combination of words and promises are being used. Online safeguarding for children, adults, and business. You can see it clearly makes the statement, fight phishing scams with a Pi-hole, gives you a bit of an explanation. And then at the bottom, you're like, well, hang on, buy one? Turns out there are people selling them, which kind of goes against and defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to do, which is I'm trying to convince you that you could do all this with a Raspberry Pi server and do so much more. People are actually selling custom-made solutions where you basically just plug and play and forget all about it. I imagine it'll come with some instructions in the pack to show you how to do it. But £136, you can actually build it for yourself for cheaper than what some videos look much like I did. And hopefully in one of these videos, we'll show you how to do it. So I don't recommend this at all. My whole approach is to basically convince you to do it yourself, motivate you to do things yourself, because it really isn't that hard. Within the world of chatbots, a simple Google Gemini subscription will basically solve so many questions for you. It's unbelievable. Here's another example, a recent example of tech companies getting sued in Texas. Your smart TV may be a little bit too smart. A Texas lawmaker is suing 5 major TV manufacturers, claiming they're surveilling what their users are doing by building profiles to sell anonymous advertising data using a technology called automated content recognition, uninvited invisible digital invader. So basically, the point is that online security and privacy is a big thing, and it's getting worse. As you invite more and more digital devices, IoT devices into your home, this becomes an increasingly bigger problem. And I'll explain in a second why I would not recommend Google IoT devices in the home, because there are things that they're designed to do which basically bypass your home security. And then, once again, you can actually just Google this very quickly, and he lists some of the top spying scandals and data collection scandals. You can see Google once again in the list for a microphone, which they did admit was in a product. The biggest data breach or data scandal, should we say, is Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal and the political implications that played. So there are really big ones where tech companies have done honestly heinous, once again, don't be evil, right? Don't be evil. That phrase keeps coming up every time you see, especially when you see Google come up, because when you see their original motto and then they're doing stuff like this, you just wonder, well, what happened to the motto? What happened to do the right thing? Clearly not everyone is on board with the motto. But anyway, that's just my opinionated take. So these are very big. It's kind of why there's a very famous story, which I can't find, sadly. There's a very famous story on the internet where there's an engineer who went to extreme lengths to find out that I think it was Google Chromecast on his home network was designed and was hard-coded to have Google's DNS, which I think is, where's Google's DNS? Google's DNS server, 888. So, and you can't bypass that. Device was told to use a local DNS server this network engineer set up, and these Chromecast devices were constantly bypassing it. And that's when he realized that Google's devices and a lot of Internet thing of devices are designed so that they can, as long as they've got access to the internet, they will always phone home. They'll always talk home, and they'll send their telemetry. And you don't really get a say in the matter of what they send. Diagnostic data, telemetric data, trying to figure out and observing what you do with these given products. And that's kind of why I don't trust devices on my home network, because it has big implications for what you do on your home, on your router as well, which we'll cover later in the tutorial section. So yes, that is a big thing. So moving on, a very famous but sinister story is where Target had a prediction algorithm built by a data scientist called Andrew Paul, who was able to figure out that a shopper's daughter, the daughter of a father, she was pregnant before the father knew. Very famous story, incredibly worrying, but that's a good read if you're interested in that. This is the article that I found that gives you both takes on the story, and then he's taken a snippet from the official New York Times article, which is paywall, sadly. It's in here is where they reveal a little bit more about how tech companies do dig up this kind of data and figure out what you're trying to do. Yeah, so famous stories about what these companies are doing, and it's just wrong. But my point is, I'm hoping that, I've convinced you that you should care about what you and your children, what your partner do on the internet. More importantly, that you get to say in what data you send or share with the online companies, and that you should not just go and start getting rid of any local browser-based client extension that you use. So if you're an internet and tech user, you've been paying attention to the tech world, you would have realized that Google and YouTube started a massive war on uBlock Origin because it was incredibly effective at basically blocking adverts and stuff, including a very famous thing that it was able to do for YouTube, which I won't specify. This looks long story short. Don't get rid of your client-side browser extensions because a DNS network level in Blocker only works at the DNS level. It does not know what scripts and what code is running at the client level, which is at the browser. So you need a combination of both to try and keep your home devices as secure as possible. The advantage of the network ad blocker is that it basically blocks everything because all your devices have to go through your home network, and you can redirect all your traffic to then go towards your DNS, which then gets to say what gets loaded or not. And the disadvantage of client side, like uBlock and Privacy Badger, is that you have to install it on all of your client browsers, which is a bit of a faff, to be honest with you, but it's what you have to do if you want to keep your family safe on the internet. So yes, don't go and get rid of Privacy Badger, uBlock Origin, and whatever else you're using, because the scripts still reveal the things that are still being loaded on the page. So if I click reload on this page, what is being loaded, you can still see there's still 13 things that are still coming through, which the uBlock hasn't blocked. And that's where later I'll tell you that uBlock and list, shall we say, on the Pi-hole is a massive black art. It's a very hard thing to try and master what things you want to try and block. Anyway, that's it for this section. The next section we'll jump into the tutorial. Hopefully you've stuck around and I'll show you exactly what I did to try and get my setup working. So now we're on to the tutorial portion of the Raspberry Pi-hole server project. And the first thing that you're going to ideally need is a NAS server where you can freely share and copy your Docker compose files into. I already have one that's working and I'm happy to share that with you for free. All I would appreciate it is if you send me a like and subscribe to the channel, and then I'll be happy to share with you my actual working config files. This obviously took a long time, almost like a day's worth of messing about trying to get this to run. But this is the actual working config. You can see I've set my username, my group ID, user ID. I've got a default password. I've even set the DNS upstream resolver, which is unbound on the local port 533. I've got host mounted volumes. You can see that from the location of where this file runs, it goes up one level, goes up another level, looks for a config folder, looks for an etc Pi-hole folder, and then you've got the colon syntax, which is part of the volume mounting syntax, and then it will map it internally inside the container to an etc folder called Pi-hole. So this was a massive gotcha that I had to learn, which is basically in order for Docker and your containers to run effectively, they have to run on the host mounted folders have to be running on the same file system. And if you're running it on an external file system like what I have here, which is the Samba share, which is running exFAT, which is the file system, this is not going to work. This is no bueno, and you will get absolutely nowhere, and it's a massive gotcha. So you've got two options to get around this. You can just run volumes. You can use named volumes and let Docker anonymize and hide and manage your config and files that the containers create, and then you'd have to manage backup separately. I was not interested in that. I actually wanted host mounted volume files because then I can see clearly what's been generated. You can look at logs easily. You can copy files in and out of the container, take backups of databases. There's a lot of advantages for you to be working off host mounted volume. That's kind of what this is. The one thing that's not relevant to you if you guys were to take my compose file is that I am sharing my vibe coding project's network because I am reverse proxying because I am sharing the same SSL certificate, because my vibe coding project has already stolen and taken the 443 port. I'm not interested in creating a new port. As you can see here, my vibe coding project has taken the 443 default SSL port. I wasn't interested in creating another port and for SSL access and configuring Nginx. I was just like, no, I want to use the same naming convention, because I came up with a naming convention called .remote, which represents things that are not living locally on my machine. They're hosted somewhere on my network. So I wanted my Pi-hole to follow the same naming convention. That meant I had to configure the Nginx config in my vibe coding project so that it would also share and reverse proxy any traffic that comes in that should go to the Pi-hole server. I could show you that in a minute. So yes, you will not need this. This is strictly for me. I recommend you use these mounted volumes. I've set the upstream DNS resolver, which is a unbound container instance using its default port of 533. That's not a lot to really talk about in this area. And if it helps, I used Claude to help me generate, was it Claude or Gemini? I can't remember. One of those two coding agents helped me generate the script so I can innovate. And I kept pushing it, I kept testing it. And my first go was I had this Docker file running from my external hard drive. And that's when I started learning about permissions related errors. And eventually that led me to SSHing into the root of my Raspberry Pi and creating a Docker folder right off the root. So cd into root, list everything. There's a Docker folder. You could see it was recently created. I think that's the access stamps. I might be mistaken. You can see that it was recently created. And then what I did was I created two folders in there. One for the volume mounts where the config lives, and then one for the actual Docker files, which as you can see here, Docker files, Pi-hole. And it's the only thing that I've got actually host in here. There isn't anything else I think I've got in here. I do actually have my vibe coding project, which has its own Docker file deployment in here. I've got a Docker file in here, but this doesn't have the same demands. It was only the Postgres instance, which is where I realized that I need this to work slightly differently. So you can see here, no volume mounts, the API itself, no volume mounts, so no need to map any volumes. The migration container, which I migrate the database, no volume mounts, but then you can see the database is mapped to the default home directory. So I need to clean these up and eventually move this into my new Docker rooted directory, but for now it will do. And then this is my Nginx instance, because you can see there it is stolen and takes the 443 default port, which is the thing that I really want to steal, which is the thing I really want. So, and then the config for that is in here. So Docker Nginx conf. You can get Claude and stuff like that to generate these things for you. They're remarkably good. And because this is not exposed to the internet, it's fairly safe to set and experiment with these kinds of things locally. Because as you can see, I've got my vibe coding project, which is already taken up. That's the main thing that I set up on here. And you can see the servers and the names that it will look for. But then I wanted it to also look for anything that comes in that matches Pi-hole.remote. So I had to go through the problem of setting this up. So once again, this is a me problem. It's not a you problem, but it's something for you to bear in mind that you don't need to do this because Pi-hole does come pre-configured with its own certificate. That certificate, if I am correct, you can see here. So config Pi-hole, go into here, and there should be a CRT. So it already comes, and I think it's like https pi.hole or something like that. And if you add a host file entry, it should instantly navigate to the IP address of your Raspberry Pi server. But that's what I'm led to believe, that it comes already pre-generates a certificate. You can use that certificate to talk to your Pi-hole instance with SSL. I wasn't interested in using that because I wanted to use my pre-gen certificate for my vibe coding project. Because I'm pedantic and I'm annoying, I wanted this. So the next big gotcha that really caught me out is the first one is permissions. You cannot run Docker containers and Docker Compose projects successfully off external file systems, which are not Linux. So I think, is it ext4? I might be getting that wrong, but that's basically the point. You can't run them off exFAT, which is what I'm running here for my Salma share. So this is my vibe coding project. This is the Raspberry Pi-hole, which we'll log into in a minute. The second major gotcha that really caught me out was that the most common reverse DNS resolver is by a chap called Matthew Vance called Unbound, and it caches your DNS keys and entries for you, so it makes things a bit faster looking things up. And the main thing to talk about here is that the community tends to get split in this area, where some people would prefer to set an upstream DNS resolver over a secure tunnel. That's another technique you can use, where you can talk over an encrypted tunnel to Cloudflare. And this is kind of where, from a security perspective, you need to decide, do you want your internet service provider to know more about what you do on the internet and, more importantly, your family? Or would you like to shield and protect your family from big tech? What matters more to you? What privacy matters more to you? I've picked big tech. I want them to know as little as they can about me and my family and what we do on the internet, what products and services we use, and trying to understand the TV shows we watch on Netflix and stuff like that. So I picked to set up a local Pi-hole resolver with Unbound, and that's what you see here in my Docker Compose file. There is a separate instance that runs Unbound for me, and you got to map the config for it too. This, once again, this can be generated with Claude. You don't have to take my version at all for it, but you can take mine if you want it. I'm happy to share it. So the second big gotcha was that this container image from Matthew Vance, it actually has no support for Linux ARM-based architectures. So this really caught me out. So I had to do a lot of backtracking very quickly to try and find another open source container image, which actually turned out to be better, because this container image for Unbound is distroless, which means it's not exactly tied to any particular blend of Linux. It also runs on Alpine Linux, which is, I think it's the most lightweight Linux image you can get with the smallest footprint. As you can see, 13 megabyte size images is absolutely pathetic and small. It's brilliant. It will not tax your Linux Raspberry Pi server. So when you go over the tags, this is the most important thing you got to do. When you look at the tag, you look at the latest tag, so that when you set up your script, where's it gone? When you set up your script, you can see there that I'm doing Pi-hole :latest, Unbound :latest. You want to make sure that if you ever bring your server down and bring it back up again, there's a very good chance a new image ID has been published and tagged with latest. And you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And this caught me out a little bit, but now I found the Mad Nutter Unbound Docker image supports, there you go, ARM version 6, ARM version 7, and that's brilliant. That's exactly what you need. Then you go over to the Pi-hole container images, and then you do the same thing, and you expand this, and you can see that the latest tagged build also has ARM support there, ARM version 6. So that's the most critical gotcha that caught me out a lot. That will save you a lot of time when you set up your Pi-hole server instances. And I think that then the next most important thing you do is to make sure your setup is correct and you've got your files loaded and pushed and you've put them to the location of your choosing. I picked root Docker. That's where I put my stuff. The next thing you start doing is you start doing Docker logs. First off, you can see everything that's running. You can see I've got my Mashpoint vibe coding project, and then I give them nice names so I could get into them easily. But now then you start doing Docker logs Pi-hole to see how well it's doing. You can see that there's clearly some TCP connection errors from upstream sources. Not a big deal to worry about. Docker logs Unbound. And then you can see that there are a few errors. And here's the thing. I'm probably going to push this into Claude to analyze them for me. This is the beauty of the current AI world we're living in right now. You don't need to be an expert, but Claude is the expert. And you can get Claude to analyze these logs for you. So some warnings, infos, errors. It's clearly talking to some upstream things. Not a big deal, but it is what it is. So that's one bit. This is how you verify whether your container instances are working or not, because when you start them up, they'll give you permissions-related errors or other validation errors. And then once you've set that up, you should be able to navigate to it, depending on whether you're using a custom certificate or not. I use my own custom certificate code that generates the certificate for me, sets up the names I need. I generate this using Claude. Once again, I use Claude quite a lot. So I've got my own trusting the certificate to the Windows Store, generating the certificate on Linux or Windows. So I've done quite a lot of work that streamlines this whole journey for me. I can share these, but to be honest with you, they're quite opinionated and set up towards my vibe coding project. But you can get a chatbot to generate them for you. Just give it a really good, decent prompt. But once you have all that set up and running, there is another gotcha which is worthwhile mentioning. The other gotcha is, as part of your setup, you need to then tell your router that you've got set up. So I use Asus router. So the next thing you need to do is you need to go into the local area network settings of your router or router, depending on where you are in the world. And then you need to change and tell it that all local devices that connect to your router should then be forced to go towards your Raspberry Pi hole. your Raspberry Pi server. That's what it is. I set up this static IP address a while ago, 101. And then on this Asus router, right, there's a setting that caught me out, which is it uses the router's IP as another thing to advertise for DNS requests. I had to turn that off, and it's very important that when you set up yours, your primary and secondary should be both pointing to the same location. And more often than not, some people just set this to zeros. But this is very important. This is the final part of the puzzle that you need to make sure that when you finally log into your Pi-hole server, you can actually see some traffic lights. And that is it. This is what it is. You can see that you've got these hero style metrics at the top. You've got these domains that I've custom loaded. There's a private community on GitHub that shares these block lists. And as I said earlier, this is a huge black art. Knowing what to block and knowing how effective it is one of those things where either you're active in this community and you're checking your Pi-hole server to see what's working or not. So you can see if I go to list blocked queries, you can see that the sheer volume of traffic that it's picked up and it's just blocking for you. You can imagine how busy your network must be. And then I think there is, you go into the query log and then you flick this, I think, and it tells you the things it's allowed to go through. And the next logical upgrade is to start giving these IP addresses, once again, DNS, map them to more nicer, friendlier names, because you're not going to understand a lot of what this is. As you can see, we were talking to hub.docker.com not too long ago. It's allowed that traffic or that DNS record to be looked up. So this really, in a nutshell, this is basically the entire Pi-hole setup. I don't want to talk too much more on this. You can just set it and forget it. When you load it up for the first time, it comes with a default kind of block list. I think it's this one, Master Host, Stephen Black. That is the default one. That's a highly curated block list, and that's just the one that comes enabled. And you can add the other ones if you want as well. I've got this threat intelligence feed, the top most abused domains, not safe for work for children. Make sure your children don't use browsers that don't use safe search technology. And then you've got this one. It's another kind of web attack, dynamic DNS attacks. If you click on this, it'll give you a bit of blocks dynamic DNS servers to protect against malicious use in phishing campaigns and other. So yeah, you can consider your Pi-hole server a best effort to try and do everything you can to try and protect as much malicious content or prevent malicious content from loading on your home network. And that is it. I will do the wrap up next, and I'll see you then. So you've come a long way, and how do you know that your actual Pi-hole server with an unbound DNS resolver is actually working correctly? How do you even know that what you see is nothing more than a glorified smoke and mirrors demonstration? So let's introduce a couple of websites that you can use to verify and check that your setup is working as best as you can. To make sure that you can actually access your Pi-hole instance properly, make sure you've got a host file entry on your machine of choice. I use Windows, so you can see I've mapped pi-hole.remote in my host file to my Raspberry Pi IP address instance, and then I use this website to help me learn and understand what block lists I want to load up on my Raspberry Pi. Luckily, I didn't have to restart anything, but it's a really detailed, amazing place to start your journey on understanding what domains to block. And then that's what feeds this very large number that tells you how many domains it checks for, which is massive. So that is quite a big forest, quite a black art. So good luck trying to determine what things you want to block. And then you've got these two websites to help you determine how well your network is working, how well your Pi-hole instance is working. When I started, I was on about 68, 70, something like that. And as you can see, I'm pretty much close to 99%, which is great. And then this website you can use as it allows you to check for cache poisoning problems or attacks. And it verifies that your unbound instance is working correctly. It should eventually come back as a pass. And that is it. That is the end of the journey. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sticking with me. This video is the longest and most heavily researched video and project I've done. I seldom ever produce a script to help me think about how much content and how much research I need to do to basically give you the best possible amount of value on your time. because time is precious these days, and I wanted to make sure that I gave you everything you possibly needed to know in one video, and you hopefully don't need to go and spend more time researching more aspects of this very large subject. And as always, talk to me in the comments. I'm still a small channel. I'm still available to talk to people who are interested in joining me on this home automation, self-hosting Raspberry Pi journey. But it's amazing. 2 Christmases later, I'm finally in a position to actually start hosting my own container images. I didn't think I'd be this far, but nothing in the world of Linux and Raspberry Pi is easy. It's quite a grueling, difficult kind of world to get into because it's very unforgiving is Linux. But because you've got tools like Gemini and things like that, it's actually quite amazing when you get things working. It's very easy to discover fixes and get things working. So Linux isn't as daunting as it was, should we say, 10, 15 years ago. But now Linux is quite accessible in my view. Talk to me in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.